Welcome to this explainer. Look, we need to dive right into an urgent, rapidly evolving clinical briefing today. We're looking at a highly dangerous pathogen that has just triggered a global health emergency. I'm talking about the Bundibugyo virus. So for all the healthcare professionals and informed learners tuning in, consider this a real-time medical case study. We're going to break down the early symptoms, the specific transmission risks, and what it's actually like on the front lines of this outbreak, pulling from the absolute latest intel from the WHO, the CDC, and top infectious disease researchers. Think about the number 0 for a second, because right now that is the stark reality we're facing. 0. Unlike the more common Zaire strain of Ebola, where we finally have approved vaccines, humanity is currently facing the Bundibugyo virus with absolutely 0 approved vaccines and 0 specific therapeutic treatments. The stakes here, they are incredibly high. Without a medical silver bullet, our only real weapons are rigorous clinical diagnoses, airtight infection control, and basically flawless public health operations. So here is how we're going to tackle this today. 1. We'll look at the outbreak scale and spread. 2. The diagnostic challenge. 3. Hemorrhage and severity indicators. 4. Healthcare transmission protocols. And 5. Overcoming those major operational hurdles on the ground. Okay, Section 1. Outbreak scale and geographic spread. From Ituri to Kampala. Let's trace exactly how this pathogen is moving. Tracking the timeline here is absolutely crucial to understand the sheer speed of this crisis. On May 5, 2026, the index case died in Mongbawalu, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Well, the funeral that followed involved direct physical contact with the deceased, which is very common in local customs, and it acted as a massive superspreader event. Fast forward just 10 days, the virus has crossed international borders and is confirmed in Kampala, the bustling capital of Uganda. By May 17th, the WHO pulled the fire alarm, declaring a public health emergency of international concern. And as of late May, we are already looking at 134 confirmed cases and over 900 suspected ones. You guys, this went from a single isolated rural event to an international emergency in just 2 weeks. The geographic concentration is really telling too. The vast majority of cases are clustered in the DRC's Ituri province, specifically Bunia, Rwampara, and Mongbawalu. But we have to pay attention to Uganda. The fact that the virus reached a densely populated capital city like Kampala, which is over 1,000 kilometers from the epicenter, is a huge red flag. It proves this isn't just an isolated rural issue anymore. It is a highly mobile threat. Moving on to Section 2, the clinical diagnostic challenge, or what I like to call the symptom trap. For frontline diagnosticians, this initial phase is easily the most dangerous. Think about it. Early Bundibugyo symptoms are sudden high fever, severe headache, extreme fatigue, and muscle pain. Sounds familiar, right? They are entirely generic. They perfectly mimic highly endemic illnesses in that exact region, things like malaria, typhoid, and cholera. Honestly, differentiating Bundibugyo from a routine case of malaria in those first couple of days is nearly impossible without specialized PCR or antigen lab confirmation. That's the trap. And here is the terrifying result of that trap. Diagnostic ambiguity literally turns hospitals themselves into early transmission hubs. A patient walks into triage looking like an everyday malaria case. Healthcare workers don't immediately suspect Ebola, so they don't don full protective gear. It's tragic, but in this outbreak alone, 16 medical staff have already been infected. Hospitals are supposed to be safe havens, but they can amplify the virus like wildfire if clinical suspicion isn't through the roof from the very second a patient walks through the doors. Let's look at Section 3, hemorrhage and severity indicators, disease progression. What actually happens when that tricky initial diagnostic window closes? We can break the clinical presentation down into 3 very distinct stages. Days 1 to 3 are that deceptive early fever stage we just talked about. But then, moving into stage 2, around days 3 to 7, patients hit severe gastrointestinal distress. We're talking severe vomiting, relentless diarrhea, and intense stomach pain, leading to immense, rapid fluid loss. Then we hit stage 3, usually in the 2nd week. This is the severe phase. It brings unexplained bleeding, extreme confusion, neurological symptoms, and quite often, total collapse. This 2nd week, it's typically the lethal peak of the infection. I want you to remember this specific data point, 3.52. According to a recent meta-analysis in BMC Infectious Diseases, hemorrhagic manifestations carry an odds ratio of 3.52. In plain English, if a patient begins to bleed, Whether that's GI bleeding, skin hemorrhages, or bleeding from the eyes, they are literally 3.5 times more likely to die. Hemorrhage isn't just a symptom here, it is the absolute strongest clinical predictor of mortality we have for this disease. As CDRAP and recent findings highlight, Bundibugyo carries a case fatality rate hovering between 30 and 50%. And since we have no specific antivirals to give them, our strategy is forced to be incredibly basic yet meticulously precise. High-quality supportive management is literally everything. That means aggressive, early intravenous fluids, strict electrolyte correction, and oxygen support. Right now, aggressive supportive care is our absolute best and only defense to drive that fatality rate down. Which brings us to Section 4, Healthcare Transmission and Protocols, Breaking the Chain. When we map out transmission vectors to clinical contexts, it shows exactly how staff have to defend their wards. Let's be crystal clear. Bundibugyo is not airborne. You don't catch it by just breathing the same room air. It's transmitted exclusively through direct contact with infected bodily fluids. Blood and vomit are massive hazards during bedside nursing and triage. Feces and urine make basic patient hygiene incredibly dangerous. Even sweat and saliva mean a routine physical exam is a risk without protection. And importantly, the virus can actually persist in semen and amniotic fluid long after the patient has recovered, which means we need hyper-strict protocols in maternal care and post-recovery follow-up too. Because of those specific fluid vectors, the infection prevention and control, or IPC protocols, are utterly non-negotiable. First up, rapid isolation, the literal second there is early clinical suspicion. Do not wait for lab results to come back. Second, strict, uncompromised use of full personal protective equipment. Third, aggressive environmental disinfection of absolutely every surface. And fourth, zero unprotected physical contact with deceased patients. If we want to break the chain of nosocomial transmission in healthcare settings, we need absolute perfection in these 4 areas. All right, Section 5, Overcoming Operational Hurdles, the community front. Because what happens when you have perfect clinical protocols inside the hospital, but the environment right outside is collapsing? The sobering reality on the ground is that clinical excellence doesn't mean much if public health operations break down in the community. Right now, systemic field challenges are throwing massive wrenches into the response. We're seeing active community resistance to health teams. There are ongoing violent security incidents from militias in the DRC's Ituri province directly targeting health facilities. On top of that, deeply rooted traditional burial practices that require touching the corpse are still acting as superspreader events. When you mix all of that with the sheer difficulty of tracing mobile and conflict-displaced populations, well, you end up with terrified families hiding their sick relatives, and that artificially extends the entire lifespan of the outbreak. To really grasp the scale of this operational hurdle, just wrap your head around this number, 3,071. As of late May, that is the number of potential contacts currently being actively traced across the DRC and Uganda. Just think about the sheer logistics of that. Over 3,000 people need to be physically located, monitored every single day for 21 days for a fever, and instantly isolated if symptoms pop up. It is a monumental, exhausting public health task, but it's exactly what's required to literally box the virus in. So, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. What happens when a rare, deadly pathogen with absolutely no vaccine exposes the eroded foundations of our global health infrastructure? This case study of the Bundibugyo outbreak proves that the biology of the virus is only half the battle, right? The other half is the environment, the funding, the community trust, and the baseline preparedness of the systems we all rely on. We really need to consider the true cost, which is ultimately measured in human lives, of constantly just reacting to these crises rather than proactively preventing them. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, stay vigilant, and stay safe out there.